Thank you all so much. I'm JJ, by the way. Hi, that's my face. Colleen and I are so excited to be here and to speak with all of you this evening. And I'm very excited that as a person who is from outside Pittsburgh, that we're seeing such a big Pennsylvania presence on this call. But I really want to stress it's phenomenal that things like Dementia Friendly and Alzheimer's Association are available not just within the state, but nationwide, as is Brady. And we'll be talking about things on this call from kind of a national perspective. But when we get to the Q&A, please feel free if you have specific kind of state questions. We have people on the call like Diane, like Janie, like Stacy, who really, really know their state very well. And then Colleen is a font of information for every other state out there. But in short, before we hop in, I am JJ Jamplon. I'm the partnerships manager here at Brady, where I work on initiatives like This Is Our Lane, which is our public health initiative, and Shogun Safety, which is our secure storage in media. And Colleen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, JJ. And hello, everyone. My name is Colleen Creighton. I'm Senior Director of our End Family Fire campaign. That's our secure storage of firearms campaign. I also work on our firearm restraining orders, our ERPO campaign, and just in general. I come to the space from suicide prevention, so you'll see a lot of that cross through coming as we present.
Yes, and before we get into the meat of things, I would assume that all of you read the flyer for this event, and so you're aware that we are going to be discussing, as Colleen said, things like suicide, things like firearms, and we will at one point be showing a video which does have depictions of violence and shows firearms. So if you need to at any point take a minute away or turn your screen off, I understand that these can be really triggering activities, and we're going to be moving pretty quickly just because we have so much information to share. So I don't want you to feel like we're just brushing past this. We're aware that this is a very, very serious topic that hits very close to home for most Americans. So why are we here? What are the facts that make us act? Colleen.
Sure. As you can see, and you know the data pretty well, look at every day how many people are shot. That's 320, and that's 100 people are killed. But I think what gets left out of this a lot of times is, yes, that's one individual every 11 minutes, but it's also their family, their friend, their community. So the impact is kind of rippled throughout. And I think far too often that ripple effect gets kind of lost. The other thing that gets lost in a lot of the conversation is we hear about mass shootings, we hear about homicides, but it's like 55, closer to 60% now of all gun deaths are actually suicides. But unfortunately, people don't want to talk about that aspect of it. And then, when we do data, we do at Brady with End Family Fire, we do a lot of inquiries, a lot of surveys of individuals around the country. We realize that only about 30% of gun owners are actually locking their firearms unloaded and locked, and like locked away, whether it's a cable lock or a lockbox or safe or something like that, which is, I mean, a third. That's kind of scary. There's a lot of guns out there. And a lot of times we've been on focus groups where the individual's like, yeah, I have 11 guns. Okay, well, wait, I can only find out where eight are right now. And you're like, well, where are those other three? So there's a lot of guns that are just out there in circulation that are not securely stored, and that's what gives us pause. Why? Intentional use, suicide, especially youth and the elderly. Unintentional shootings we'll get into. We lose 8 kids a day for, getting into a parent or a guardian's firearm, especially like in a car, in a house that wasn't secured. And then theft. You're seeing a lot of guns that aren't securely stored. There's a big case out in California with some celebrities, and, everyone was horrified by this, but it was their gun in the house that was used, which makes it even more painful. So a lot of this it's an easy call to action. Just keep your guns securely stored. So here's the other aspect is like I said about that 8 and 11, a lot of folks don't actually have a plan for their firearms, if they become impaired. So what happens if you have a loved one that's suffering, dementia, crisis, whatever that may be? 60% of dementia patients have firearms in the home, right? And 50% of those, they're stored loaded, ready. And an additional 38%, they don't know if the firearms are stored securely or not. So that's the kind of concern, is that, everyone's going to struggle at some point, especially if you have someone in your home that maybe is not cognizant aware all the time. you need to make sure that their access to that gun, there's some kind of safety protocol in process because as we saw too, firearms are the most lethal means of suicide, more than 90% of them. Because the thing is, if a lot of times if someone uses another method, there is a chance for survival. With a gun, it's likely that they will not survive the gunshot and not even make it to the emergency room where then they have a shot. And you'll see that among dementia patients, firearms are the most common method of suicide, more than 70%. So even older adults with even mild cognitive deficits are I'm sorry, trying to watch the Slack as well, represented among those hospitalized for suicide attempts. So there's a critical risk that no one is talking about. And, this all comes down to there are guns, there are those with like cognitive impairments or deficits, there's Alzheimer's, dementia, like we need to talk about it more often and we need to have a plan in place. Obviously, access to a gun triples the risk of suicide. And, that's every 19 minutes. And that's more than 27,000 individuals who are dying by firearm suicide. And you may recall was it Tuesday, was actually National Firearm Suicide Prevention Day. And so Brady was up on the Hill, Capitol Hill, with representatives of the gun violence task force, but also the mental health task force. And we said, both the committees really need to talk more often and talk together because this is an issue that impacts so many people around the country. And so JJ too, anything that you want to say or jump in too. Um, but this is what kind of gives me pause too. You have more guns in circulation. We've seen that ever since COVID. So in fact, the End Family Fire put together a campaign because we said there's a lot more guns around. Does our messaging still work? What do we need to do? So we have a whole new campaign specifically for new gun owners. And we've seen upticks right now, especially in the past year, of different populations getting it because they feel threatened themselves. So you have more guns in circulation, you have a lot of guns that aren't safely stored, and you have a risk of harm to others. So that's like that trifecta. But again, that trifecta could all be narrowed with just keeping guns securely stored. That's all we ask. It's a pretty easy call to action.
And I think one of the things to really highlight, and we're going to dig into it a little bit more, is so often we hear it couldn't happen to me.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, Colleen and I working in the space with a lot of survivors, every survivor says they didn't think it would happen to them. Um, no one would find my gun. It's hidden so well. My kids don't know where it is. There's no way that my uncle could get access to his firearm. We hid it too well. Or kind of the belief that suicide doesn't happen in my community or in my family, that people who die from firearm suicide don't look like who I'm thinking of. But the reality is that as we've seen an increased number of guns in circulation and an increased number of guns stored unsecurely, we've also seen who is passing from firearm suicide change. So we're seeing increased rates, particularly of Black and brown youth. We're seeing increased rates of women overall for the very first time, starting from 2022 and up. So it's really important that just because maybe it's not what you've seen on TV or not kind of what you've experienced, or maybe even what your care team has experienced in the past, doesn't mean that this isn't applicable to you and maybe what you see people in your community going through. When we're talking about folks who have been diagnosed with a cognitive impairment too, we also might be talking about people who have just gotten really difficult medical information to swallow, right? It means maybe a change of lifestyle, maybe a loss of independence, maybe a financial change. And whenever you have kind of one of those big seismic shifts, particularly around health, we do see in certain populations an increased risk of harm to yourself. So that's then another opportunity too, where maybe someone would be normally, you would not have a concern, but maybe right after a particular medical diagnosis or while undergoing certain types of medical treatment, you might have concerns that pop up that are temporary. So we're going to talk a little bit later and hear about maybe temporary solutions versus permanent solutions. How you don't have to go charging full steam ahead to no more guns out of my house.
Mhm.
There's a lid for every pot is kind of the perspective that we're taking, and there's a way that you can reduce harm within your family unit, and a lot of that is through being prepared in advance and being committed to, if you are a firearms owner, keeping them secure.
And like JJ said, this impacts everybody. We had a conversation with one school administrator, and his attitude was, "That's the next town over. That suicide happened in that school district, not mine." And we're like, "Well, that makes no sense because it's literally just a block away from where the district is." So like, it does impact you. No doubt those kids are connected in some way. And like JJ said, at the national level, I mean, you can see from like Tampa Bay Times, NPR, we do have this issue popping up around the country, but yet no one's talking about it. And so, you can see two different cases here. Tampa Bay, it was a local police chief and two-term county sheriff, like sat in his wheelchair, discharged the Glock on the table in front of him, and did not realize that he'd killed and shot and killed his wife. And so that was, I mean, once he had calmed down. So that's the whole thing, is that intersection. Like, just be aware of what guns are around, whether they're stored properly, whether they're loaded, whether they're locked away. You can see the Seattle Times, the same thing. Someone was pointing their handgun at three officers. So this is where you're starting to see a lot more police departments get involved. And, then it becomes like, are their lives in danger? And then it becomes a fatal shooting when it should not have been. It could have been really easy intersected, especially now as a lot more police departments are having crisis team responses. Those that aren't, a lot of times the police departments just aren't trained on how to deal with this. They aren't trained to, know what to say or know how. They're just seeing someone individually and trained for what they're normally used to.
And I think that what this really highlights too, these three examples, and unfortunately there were very many, there were for us to kind of pick from to be representative, is we see in the first one with Tampa Bay, this was done when the gentleman, Mr. Hill, was just kind of cleaning his firearm.
Yeah.
And had a lapse. And the way that oftentimes maybe your doctor has spoken to you about how a loved one or how you yourself may forget that you have the stove on and walk away. There's a short-term memory lapse. He thought he had cleared the chamber of his gun, which I'm sure he's done thousands of times, if not more, and shot and almost killed his wife. And the second case for NPR, this gentleman, Ed, he forgot he didn't recognize his wife and thought there was an intruder in his home, locked her out, went for a firearm. From the Seattle Times, Mr. Lee ends up being shot and killed because he called the police because he thought there was an intruder in his home because he didn't recognize someone who was there, and then didn't realize when the police came that he had called them. He thought they were intruders. And so when we're talking about the potential for harm to yourself and others, we're going to talk a little bit later about the harm potential for caretakers and the family members. There's just so many opportunities that someone who is experiencing one of these declines, when there's firearms present in the home, can harm themselves, can harm the people that they love, can harm members of the community, can be harmed themselves, even if it's not them causing the direct harm to themselves. And then also then them later, after a lapse, maybe having to then deal with the aftermath of that, right? Which is a huge emotional toll, not just on them, but their families. When we're talking about caregivers or care partners, people who are living with folks, people who are providing care maybe 24/7, maybe just for a few hours, as I believe Janie pointed out, it's a lot. I think Diane's group speaks to that too, is that caretakers need support themselves. And so the suicide risk for those caretakers is often overlooked, but is super critical to address, especially if caretakers have access to a firearm. It's emotionally and physically exhausting. And studies of caretakers who reported that they had depressive symptoms sat between 40 to 70% higher than non-caregivers. And in many cases, if we're ranking kind of what we like suicidality on a scale from, kind of like maybe they had been considering or had thoughts of self-harm versus they were kind of making a plan. Many of them had already kind of reached the stage where they were talking about making or thinking about making a plan. They were really kind of visualizing what they would have to go through or thinking, okay, how would I make this happen? We also increasingly, I think a lot of us have seen stories in the news of individuals, of caretakers who say, well, if I can't take care of my loved one, no one can. And so we're seeing things where maybe two people, there's a murder suicide aspect and things like that. None of us want that. And the stopgap for that is obviously mental health care and support, but it is also then limiting that access to the firearm because, as we talk a lot about in the gun violence prevention space, means matter. And so that's exactly what Colleen said earlier, which is when a firearm is over 90% lethal, um, there's not time after normally for a medical intervention where there might be, or there often is. A lot of folks think that if someone is experiencing thoughts of self harm, that it doesn't matter the method, that they'll find a way to harm themselves. We know that that's not true. In fact, we know that most people don't reattempt. So this is just really important for folks on the call who might be caretakers themselves, or think that they might move into that space eventually. Or if you know that at some point you might need someone to care for you. And we're going to talk about how maybe you can be responsible now to help protect your loved ones in the future while they care for you.
And we can both jump in here too, but like, you know, we also, and like I said earlier too, it's not the only individual who's impacted, right? You're going to have visitors, like JJ saw those cases earlier where, you know, they didn't recognize the person coming in. You're going to have a lot of times visiting nurses, or you're going to have grandchildren or people coming in. So a lot of people are going to have access to that firearm if it's not safely stored, if it's out, you know, on a table, easily accessible to anyone just even walking through. Unfortunately, there was a Secret Service report that showed that 76% of all school shooters got their guns from the home when they shouldn't have had access, right? And we know that there's 30 million kids out there living in a house where the guns are not safely stored. And like I said earlier, there's 8 kids a day that come across their family's gun when they shouldn't have access, and they take their own lives. So we see this a lot, like in cars. You know, the adult runs into the grocery store or quickly into convenience stores. The kids are sitting in the car and they're playing around, and the gun was just safe, like unsecurely stored under the seat. And, you know, so we're talking with individuals, whether it's the car, whether it's your home, you know, just get a lock, a cable lock, some sort of a locking device where someone does not have access that shouldn't have it. And then, like JJ said earlier, parents are saying, like, you know, they don't know the code, they don't know where the gun is stored, don't even worry, it's up on a high shelf, they could never climb. And we know that nearly 1 in 4 kids have actually handled the gun in their home without their parent knowing. A lot of times they aren't trained to do with that. And we see a lot of cases, like there's a very famous case, Ethan, up in Connecticut, where Ethan's law is based on, where 2 kids were playing around. He's like, let me show you the gun, you know, and there were rounds in there, and he put it up to and shot his friend. And so again, all of that could have been not even an issue if the gun was safely stored.
There's also an additional safety risk, as Colleen talked about at the beginning when we showed you that cycle of kind of guns in circulation, period. So when we're thinking about someone in cognitive decline, they may live alone, or they may have periods where they're alone, where there's not a caretaker present. If they're in this case where, you know, the number of times I have heard, oh, I think I have 6 guns. I go, okay, well, we got to find them. We got to know where they are. If it's kind of maybe known in the neighborhood that somebody lives alone and they have a really, I'm going to date myself here, a really expensive stereo system, and they may not recognize who they're letting in the door, they may not remember to lock the door or things like that, that puts them at risk for a robbery or to be the victim of a crime. Firearms are the same way. So we really want to think about too, the idea of how terrible would you feel as a gun owner if your gun was kind of taken from your home and you didn't even realize it, either by someone you knew or someone you didn't know, and then it was used to harm someone else. Every gun owner so far that I know personally comes to gun ownership with this really firm sense of responsibility. Most of the gun owners I know take it very, very seriously, and they would be absolutely destroyed if their grandchild or a family friend or a kid from the neighborhood somehow ended up getting a gun and getting harmed because they didn't have it locked. And that takes us kind of directly into the whole issue of what Colleen works so beautifully on, which is end family fire.
So end family fire, it's a play off the term friendly fire, right? And so a little bit about the campaign. The campaign's been around since 2018. And Brady took a look and said, we are losing far too many people each and every year to gun violence. Reached out to Ad Council, which you may know from like Smokey the Bear and some of the other very visible national campaigns, and said, you're the public health education experts around the country on what works for advertising. Like, how do we take a look at this? What's the best way to go in? And you can see from the next slide, one of the ways they said is give it a name. If you give it a name, you can wrap a public health strategy around it. And so that's where we did some testing, and what we landed on was family fire. And again, it's a shooting results from someone misusing an unsecured firearm from the home. Now, what that means is then, we said, okay, that we have a term, we're going to wrap our strategy. We need gun owners to be part of this conversation. It can't be just us telling gun owners what to do. And so what that means is focus groups, we bring them in, but we bring them in on each and every campaign. So we do kind of a subject matter expertise board in the front, and then anything, whether it's concept, whether we have visuals, whether we have storyboards, all of that, gun owners are part of that team that makes sure what we do is all vetted throughout. They can course correct as needed. So by the time the campaign gets ready to launch, we know it's going to be a success, and it's not just us talking at gun owners. It's nonpartisan, non-political. We don't get anything into that. We leave that to the Brady either litigation or policy side. We just do strictly education. The fact that we partner with Ad Council on this means we cannot get political in any shape or form. And we place the family at the center. We don't really focus on the gun. It's more about the family and about the individual. And then we cover it in kind of these three pillars, which are unintentional. That's that 8 children, gun suicides. Under the gun suicides, we also work with veterans. We deal with lived experience. And then, which we'll get into in a little bit, is intentional shootings from an unintended user, misuse, and kind of all of that. But again, all comes down to one easy call to action, and that's just store your guns securely.
And as Colleen just said, that idea of centering the family. So centering, it's not about the firearm, it's about the family, is going to be really important when we start practicing some of the scenarios later on in this talk, when we start talking about like ways that you can bring this conversation up with different folks. I'm going to play a really quick PSA from End Family Fire that's Prepare for Misuse that details kind of maybe the worst case scenarios, unfortunately, if a firearm is not secured in the home. So again, it's 60 seconds exactly. And if depictions of firearms or violence make you uncomfy, this is a good time to pop away.
I know my gun should be stored locked and unloaded. But what good is a gun if it's not prepared for use? So instead, I'm prepared for misuse. I'm prepared to stop arterial bleeding in 3 minutes. Less for kids, they bleed out faster. My son just shot himself. Hurry. Access to firearms triples your risk of death by suicide. But that's not the only way to misuse a gun.
I think I heard Mama.
Misuse can happen when you least expect. So being prepared means knowing the difference between CPR for adults and kids. Unintentional shootings happen every day.
There's been another deadly shooting in a local elementary
So that sense of safety my guns bring me
with a gun he acquired from a family member's home.
can shatter in an instant.
The developing story, and we'll bring you more updates as they happen.
Store your gun securely, locked, unloaded, and away from ammo.
That video, if you're familiar with our PSAs, that is probably our hardest hitting one, and it's it's the darkest, it's the deepest. When we launched, now the reason we did this one and kind of took a different spin at it is stations that play our PSAs reached out and they said, we love your unintentional, we love the vet suicide, we love the veteran in general, we love all of the PSAs. But right now we're coming off of a rash of mass shootings, and we really need something that's a little more evergreen. And they said, so that we can play, but in case of something that's not one pillar of that, what we can use. And so that's what kind of the nexus that led us to Prepare for Misuse. And right now it's probably our most requested PSA around the country. So it is playing, and we work with Ad Council to get it out far and wide as possible as we can. What was interesting, the 2 directors of this, their brothers that helped direct us, one of them started having nightmares about, he's a gun owner, and he was preparing, his wife was about to have a baby within the next couple of months. He was like, oh my gosh, looking back, my nieces and nephews had been here. I don't know if my gun's always safely stored. And like this, making this PSA actually changed his behavior. But it was interesting. He was like, I'm waking up in a sweat in the middle of the night thinking about like, what if they did get access to my gun? And so that's, that's our goal, is to get this, to let other families know that these are three different trajectories of what can happen. The son, the daughter, and it could be a school shooter.
And I think what's really important about this PSA too, when we talk about this conversation, is it's centering on the gun owner changing his behavior from a perspective of protecting himself and those around him. So he's going to act now, presumably knowing that these risks with a sense of agency. And so I think when we're talking about what we can do, some of the things that have kind of come up already, which is kind of centering the family, centering the gun owner as the kind of person who's steering the ship, but who you are trusting to behave appropriately, not demonizing the firearm, but making sure that behavior is modified. These are all things that are really essential when you're engaging in conversations with folks about secure storage, especially folks who are going through a cognitive decline. There are a bunch of different secure storage options. It may look different for everyone, and people may have multiple versions. You may have someone who is a big collector who may have, long guns that they like to keep in a particular safe or a particular cabinet. And then they maybe have a handgun that they like to use with either a trigger lock or a clamshell lock. The cheapest on the market is something like this. It's known as a cable lock. You can use them on anything. You can use them on a handgun. You can use it on a rifle. A lot of times, though, gun owners, folks who have multiple firearms or people who shoot a lot, don't enjoy cable locks as much. They have their reasons. And so if that's the case, I'm not going to try to sell you on a cable lock. I'm going to talk to you about what fits your lifestyle, what fits your budget, what fits your firearm best. There's some crazy ones that are amazingly technological and are tied into apps for folks who are into that. And then there are some that are very old school. Colleen, anything you wanted to add on these?
No, I was going to say, a lot of folks have asked us, like, what's the safest to, the least and then to the most. And we don't really get into that conversation. Like JJ said, it's really up to the individual gun owner. They're going to have their favorite, their favorite style, their favorite one that maybe has been passed down from generations. And so we really leave it up to the gun owner and their family on, like, you do you, whichever just as long as it is securely stored, that's our concern. However, what that means to you, we leave that up to the family and the individual. Because right now, like JJ said, there's so much technology coming fast and furiously, and offsite too is another a lot more folks are stepping up and offering offsite storage. And so there's really like a whole range of options.
When we're talking about options, I want to talk about making future plans. So before the decision is made for you from someone else, or before someone has to step in and help you make that decision, if you are a gun owner, you can be proactive in making a plan. And it matters for a couple of different reasons. If you don't have a plan for a firearm, sometimes they can be transfers after someone has passed or after someone is incapacitated can sometimes be very, very difficult. It can lead to legal problems. There can be confusion in the family of who is responsible for this. There are the problems. I know that I used to get calls all the time when I first started at Brady, and my phone number was public facing of, my uncle passed and he left me all of his guns and I don't want them. What do I do with them? Or I don't know how to get this appraised, or he passed in Virginia and I live in California. What do I do? And so it's all of this confusion. Whereas if you have planned in advance for who is getting them, who is responsible for them, you've let them know where they are, where the paperwork is, what the code is for the safe. If it's a biometric safe, you've added them as an additional user so they can get to them after the fact. These are things that I think will give you as a firearms owner a lot of peace of mind, but also then your family a lot of peace of mind because they know where this is going. They know eventually kind of what your wishes were. You can put them in an estate plan. Firearms you can put in just the same way that you're willing maybe some china or a vehicle or a record collection. That helps if you are a collector. It helps make sure that the people you wanted to get them are getting them. It allows for when maybe your heirs go in to get them transferred, they're going to need to show, why it is that they're getting them. And it really takes the burden down on the executor of your estate. And so I like framing making the future plan proactively a lot, because it still positions, you know, someone who is a firearms owner as someone who is responsible, as someone who is protective. They're trying to ease the burden on their family. And this is how you can do that, simply by sitting down with a piece of paper and making a plan. And excitingly, actually, we will, when we're sending the resources around at the end, Brady does have a number of resources for folks, including a partnership with an agency that will make you a will for free. So you can sit down online and draw that up quickly, easily, so that there is something written down. As Colleen said when she was giving us the stats about people living in homes, most folks with dementia who own a firearm do not have a plan for their firearm. And if they do have a plan, less than 20% of them have it written down. And I don't know if any of you have dealt with a family member's estate after someone has passed, but it gets very complicated very quickly. Suddenly people are fighting over like an Avon perfume bottle, and you're like, what is this? What is happening? I wish grandma just would have put it down on paper. This solves that issue for you. This is also really important to make an inventory checklist, because it solves the problem that Colleen and I both talked about, where someone is saying, I think I have 11. I had 6, but I haven't seen this one since 82. Where are they? What are the paper? What's the paperwork associated with them? What is their provenance? This is especially important if someone is a collector and owns maybe rare firearms, or firearms that are can no longer be sold unless under like a historical separation. So other options, you can preemptively early transfer to someone through a named heir. So you go to a licensed gun dealer, an FFL. The person you want to transfer it to passes a background check, and you can do a transfer of the guns preemptively to them. I know that sometimes it's much more acceptable for folks. No one wants to be told, for example, when you're having the car conversation, that I'm taking the car away from you. However, I have seen folks who have been much more acceptable of, would you mind giving the car to X to use it? Doesn't mean necessarily the car is going away. It just means that there's a plan for it. So you can do that. You can transfer it. You can take it to sale, or you can take it to auction. You can donate it. There are lots of gun museums. There's shooting clubs. There are also a number of different services that will offer you to decommission your firearm. Some melt them down into garden material. Some turn them into sculptures. There's a lot of different options. You can also then surrender it to authorities. So if you get to a point where you just think that you don't want it, or you don't want anyone to be responsible for them after your death, you can make a pre-plan that, hey, if I ever become incapacitated for whatever reason, I need you to call the sheriff at this number and have them come pick up my firearms. There are then, after, when we move kind of from the pre-planning into the actual stage, we can temporarily remove firearms. You can do that through something called, in some states, an extreme risk protection order. They have different names. It allows key individuals, and it varies, sometimes law enforcement, sometimes medical officers, sometimes family members. It's different from place to place, to have a civil court judge rule if you are at risk of harming yourself or others, and to have your firearms temporarily removed. What's important to frame about, I think, this conversation is that this is something where the individual, the firearms owner, does get to present their own evidence. They do get to be heard in court, and it is temporary. You can go and have, you can get your guns back. State to state, the rules are a little bit different. We can talk about that during the Q&A. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of breeze through this really quickly. But in the chat right now, you can see, if you go to bradyunited.org, we have lots of information about the different laws and kind of options there. There's also lots of temporary offsite storage. So some FFLs, so some firearm retailers, some shooting ranges, and law enforcement facilities in your area may offer you offsite gun storage. And so that's where you would go in, you store your firearms there, and then they're held, and then you just have to go and prove you are who you are, and that you still clear a background check to pick them up again. This is a really great thing if, say, for example, you've just been discharged from the hospital, and you know that you're going to have caretakers maybe coming in and out of your house for the next 4 or 5 months, and you don't want any guns loose or available in the house. If someone has recently maybe experienced a TBI, and they're trying to kind of find their equilibrium. This is a really good option. I know personally, as someone who is kind of getting very into handgun shooting, didn't see that for myself in 2025, but I have been. I prefer keeping mine at a shooting range. I don't have to worry about traveling with the firearm. It's just there. And then for individuals who likes to still shoot, it's still there and available. Colleen, I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add on this one.
No, I was going to say, and thank you for the Hold My Guns link. So there are a number of states that have maps on secure storage and where you can leave them. But this is an option. A lot of times, like JJ said, there's ERPOs go by a lot of different names. So GVROs in California, LVROs in New Jersey, and there's just in Delaware, and there's a lot of different names. So, just getting it out is sometimes one of the best options.
Because we want to make sure that we have a chance to kind of walk through together for the next slide, I'm going to skip the PSA, but I will make sure I send it around to folks to watch in the after. But I think one of the best examples of why things like an extreme risk protection order is you see in the case of Illinois, which is they have a FRO, a firearms restraining order, and the PSA that End Family Fire did focusing on those called Pause to Heal, because it's all about that pause where you are giving someone a chance to get the support that they need. You are giving someone the option to kind of have another day simply by having that firearm removed. And that's what I really want to emphasize for this when we're having these conversations. I think no one wants to have the conversation, especially if you're a caretaker to like a family member or a loved one, that I'm taking your car away, that I'm taking your independence away. And firearms fall into that too, I think. But it's not that you're taking something away, it's that you're giving someone time. And I think that's the best kind of way to frame the conversation and to go in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you do reach a point where you think that a firearm does need to be permanently removed from the home, or you yourself have made the decision that you need the firearm removed from the home, you can permanently give them up. So you can call your local law enforcement. Some will come pick it up. Some you have to bring it to the station yourself. You can sign it over. That doesn't mean the gun is gone. It's still your property. It's just now out of your hands, and they can make that assessment if you can get it back. There are also national organizations you can call. We'll send around some of those resources that can help you give them up to either recycle or dispose of your firearms. There are legal methods finally at the very end. Normally when someone has been ruled kind of incapable of caring for themselves or making sound decisions, to have the guns removed. But again, we don't want to get to that point. The idea is that we don't have to let things get that dire. We can start from a much safer place and hopefully never have to get to this one. And so we do that by having a conversation. There's a couple big ones to hit. So you need to remain calm. You need to approach the conversation casually, and you need to frame it as being no different from the other safety conversations you've had. This is functionally, I know it feels different because when we talk about guns in America, it feels taboo to some of us, but it's not. This is about safety. You've brought something into your home under the idea that it's going to make you safer. It's making you unsafe. How do we help adjust that? So frame it, if whether you've already had conversations very similarly about cooking or protecting yourself from online scams, frame it that way. Explain how storing guns will protect them and their loved ones. You have to listen. This is probably, it's very rare that you're going to have a 5-minute conversation and it's like the Brady Bunch and you clap hands at the end, it's perfect. So you need to be willing to engage in a dialogue. You need to focus on what safe gun storage looks like in everyday life for that individual. In a perfect world, a perfect world for me is it's in a biometric safe, separate from ammunition, unloaded. But maybe we have to baby step our way there. Maybe someone was not comfortable with a biometric safe, they're a little bit more old school, but you can get them into a standard safe. Be prepared with a couple different options. I found that everyone loves, though, when I bring out, like, here's an app. Here's this cool, like, new technology. People are always shocked now too how inexpensive a lot of biometric work is, where it's just you put your finger down and you go, and how quick they are. And then have examples of gun owners in your life who practice safe storage, and or see if they'd be engaged. I think coming to this obviously from a peer-to-peer conversation is really great. And if you are a gun owner, start having these conversations with the people that you love. I don't know, Colleen, if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
No, I think you covered everything, JJ. This is great.
All right. So now let's practice. So we're gonna use this example, Mr. H, really quick profile, and then Colleen, you tell me what you think I should do. And then we're gonna open it up to the chat. Mm-hmm. So you have Mr. H, he's a widowed male in his late 70s. He's lived in his hometown his whole life. He is a Vietnam veteran and he does have diagnosed PTSD. He was recently undergoing treatment for cancer and is starting to have signs of cognitive decline. He had to give up driving a year ago when he got lost coming back from the grocery store. He gave up the car without issue, but it was a significant blow to his sense of self. He worked most of his life as a metal worker. He's really proud of his trade and his military service. He lives alone in his longtime home where he does have 2 firearms. He has not shot in years, but the firearms are accessible and loaded in his residence. He doesn't have a lot of social connections. He's not in a lot of clubs or community organizations. He's not going down to say like the Legion often, but he does participate a lot in his bowling league. And that's really important for him. That's kind of where all of his friends are. That's his socialization. He has some kids that live out of town with their families. He only has one that lives in town nearby. And his closest relationship familially is probably with his 8-year-old granddaughter, Navia, who he really adores. She calls him every night. He loves her. Despite everything he's got going for him, he's been saying a lot recently, both to his daughter and to caretakers who arrived to give him rides to to doctor's appointments, that he thinks his family would be better off without him around. This has raised concern. He doesn't want to let any in-home health aides or anyone come into his place and stay with him. And he doesn't want to move into a residential facility because he likes his independence. Colleen, what concerns you about this from our perspective?
Yeah, no, he does have access to his guns. He doesn't have a lot of the social safety net around him, but I know we want to open it up, and I see Dean in the chat. I think Dean, as our resident veteran who is working in this from a lot of different ways, would have an awesome response for this. Not to put you on the spot.
Oh gosh, yeah, this is a tough one. It really is, because again, I think all of us, older veterans, can relate to this man. I think though there's a few things that just from a policy perspective, and I know, we want to avoid politics per se at Brady, but again, I've been a pilot since I was 14 years old, so it's, almost 60 years. And one of the things that we require in aviation is even to fly a small single engine airplane, you have to actually go to a doctor every 2 years and and get at least a cursory physical examination and a mental status exam, before you're signed off for your FAA physical to continue to be able to fly. And certainly, the risk of, flying a small airplane, basically you can only kill yourself, whereas, having access to, guns or multiple guns, it, not only are, that it's an incredibly high risk situation. And I think that one of the things that maybe we should start advocating for is, and this would be something I think politically that we can do that, will not offend First Amendment right folks, except, people that are, extremely adamant about things, is actually requiring that people that want to own guns and keep them in their house actually have to go to a doctor and at least get a sign off that that they're reasonably cognitively safe to have a gun. And again, that's not going to eliminate all of the suicides and the mass shootings, but it might have a role. And as I said, I think professionalizing to some extent the aspects of gun ownership would be something I think that would be palatable. And again, I forget who it was that brought up the point about that they had started doing some sports shooting themselves, and that they preferred to keep their pistol at the range. And just also wanted to comment, as again a military veteran, someone who's qualified, numerous times as an expert marksman with both the assault rifle and the pistol, that in the military, you're actually not allowed to take your weapon home to your barracks or to your home on base. They always have to be secured. And so I think, again, secure storage, particularly of weapons like the AR-15, with that have the potential for, in causing incredible harm, would be very, very important.
And
Um,
Dean also, I don't know if you mentioned, is also a physician. So I mean, pilot, doctor,
oh,
like veteran, wearing your IAVA shirt, I see. So
yeah, that's right.
uh, I mean,
Yeah.
that I
You
think
picked
that's
all the careers on career day.
and
Um,
And I'll shut up after this, but again, I also served 6 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan as a flight surgeon and commanded the U.S. Air Force Combat Hospital in Baghdad during the surge in 2008. And I saw, firsthand, what the devastating injuries, that are caused by small arms fire. And this is I think the average layperson, even gun owner, has no idea, just how devastating that these injuries are. So. Okay.
that is, I mean, I think your perspective is incredibly helpful because for me, if I were taking off my Brady hat, if it were me as human me, I would not know what to do in this situation. I wouldn't want to upset anyone. I would be really worried of offending him. Is Mr. H not going to talk to me anymore? But putting my Brady hat back on, I know that there are a couple different options here. His family or his daughter can reach out to his medical team, and this is the kind of more severe end of things. Go ahead, Colleen.
JJ, a question came in from the chat too. Everyone's thanking you, Dean, but Stacy wants to know, what about the VA? Like, what is the VA an option?
Exactly. So they can reach out to the VA. There are a number of resources there. It depends on his relationship to the VA and where he's living too. But there are options where he can reach out. There are places where they could say, can we just store the guns off site for a little bit? It's making me nervous. He loves his granddaughter. She's 8 years old. It could be very easy for her to find and get access to them. You can use protecting her as the lever to get in there. You can talk to if he has a best friend at the bowling league who is also a veteran who stores his guns securely. You can ask him, hey, Roger, can you have a conversation with Mr. H about X, Y, and Z? It's making me nervous. And he can frame it as, hey, you love your kid. She's worried about her daughter. Can you do this? It's going to be different for every person
Yeah.
and what they settle on. Do they have a good relationship with their local VA? Do they have a good relationship with their doctor? Or is it more adversarial? And then finally, I think you could get to a point where you could, and this came up in the chat as well, if you were very, very concerned about Mr. H because of kind of his comments that people might be better off without him, you could speak to his care team about having him be labeled a risk to himself, at which point then he would not be able to purchase any firearms and you could have them removed. But that process is sometimes difficult and I know is very emotionally taxing, both for the people who are pursuing it and then the people who have that designation. So where I would start is, can you buy a safe as a gift? Or can you ask him, does he want to go buy some with you? Can you get him engaged that way and then really use the point, you love this little girl, don't you want her safe? Use all the facts that we provided about how kids get access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One last comment, if you don't mind, JJ, I'd like to make is, again, the VA, probably the primary care doctors there do a better job than most, regular civilian doctors do in terms of asking about, do you have guns at home? But again, that's not something that at most medical schools is routinely taught. We always ask people about, your alcohol consumption, how many packs of cigarettes a day do you smoke and things like that. But very few doctors actually ask about, do you have firearms at home? And one of the things, actually, and I kind of put in a little bit of plug for the nonprofit that my wife and I started about 7 years ago called SAFE, and I'll put the website in there. And again, we do collaborate with Brady, is that we actually have 3 modules in that are available online where we teach doctors, how to talk to their patients about guns. And, again, this is one thing that we really want to try to get into the curricula, not only all medical schools, but residency training programs. And particularly pediatric training programs are very, very interested in this. So, again, I'll put that in the chat. But
Yeah.
again, that, having doctors at least just be aware of asking the question is going to be just so important in saving lives. So.
And I'm so glad actually you brought up SAFE. We work with SAFE a lot. Normally Brady's has a similar initiative that works on training for medical providers called This Is Our Lane. And we interact a lot with it. And that's also part of it too. Start bringing these questions up to your doctor. Normalize it that it's coming from the patient that you want to hear it, because they're going to also have a pull in. In the interest of time, we're just going to do one more scenario and then open it up for Q&A. We have a few more scenarios I had. So when you go through the PowerPoint later on your own, as I'm sure you all will, let me know if you have any questions and we can talk through it. So let's talk about Mrs. H. And I'm going to open it up now to the chat. So she's an elderly woman. She has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's 5 years ago. She does live independently in a mother-in-law apartment that is attached to her niece and nephew's home. She gets overnight care and occasional respite care from home health aides. But she thinks of, she really values her independence and her self-sufficiency. A lot of her day-to-day care that's necessary is provided by her niece or nephew or a home health aide that pops in for that overnight stage. She has been very socially active. She's very involved in her church. She's in a whole bunch of different social and good organizations like the Red Hat Society. She's on her library board. I think we all know this woman. She's running around. She's doing lots of stuff. They give her a lot of joy, a lot of purpose, a lot of opportunities for your companionship. She's got a lot of friends. And despite her diagnosis, she has maintained kind of the strong sense of identity in herself. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, she did have a robbery of her home, which has really impacted her sense of safety and trust. And since that incident, and as well as because she's aware, sometimes she doesn't always remember things or remember things the way that she thinks they should have gone, she's gone really fearful of her neighborhood. She'll make a lot of comments that this neighborhood really has changed. She recently told her niece that she now carries her father's old pistol with her at all times in her handbag. She's also expressed some suspicion towards the home health aides that maybe come in for that respite care that she doesn't know as well, saying she doesn't trust them fully. This growing distrust now is placing a strain on her caregiving arrangement because Mary, the person who does most of the overnight health care, confided to Mrs. H's niece that she may be no longer able to continue working with her due to these challenges. Mary is concerned. She's heard that maybe Mrs. H has referenced the firearm or she's seen it kind of poking out of her pocketbook. She knows that she's starting to kind of reach a point where she's not trusting her caregivers. Mrs. H's niece is very concerned, especially because she would not be able to take care of her in that overnight care space should Mary leave. So a lot of challenges there. I'm going to open it up to the chat. What are some things that people are seeing here that concern them, and how might they adjust or help with this? Any thoughts?
Or if it's easy.
Colleen, do you want to jump in?
No, I was gonna say, or come off mute if we want to start this conversation.
Yeah, if you want to come off mute. Anyone?
I can just start. I
Stacey.
think there's just so many things going on. I think perhaps her living situation may be a good place to start. If she's not feeling safe, you kind of have an in to talk about, well, what would it look like for you to feel safe? What, are there other areas that you might feel safer in? So considering, a place where there's congregate care or people that are overlooking her. So maybe she won't need someone at night because it's already built in.
Yeah, I think the question is, what is the gun providing for her?
Right,
really,
a sense of security, right? So maybe if she's feeling more secure, she won't feel she needs the gun.
Yeah. So I think that's a key one, so would you feel more safe if you had Ring cameras that we could set up that you could see all the time? Is it a different living situation? Is this time for you to get a dog, which is lovely? Who doesn't enjoy that? As someone pointed out in the chat, she's very community engaged. So she seems like a rule follower. Can you talk to her about how it actually might be unlawful for her to be carrying the gun in her purse with her from place to place, depending on where she lives, if she's not licensed to do so, and she doesn't want to get in trouble? So how can we go about making sure that she stays safe and also that she's not at risk of, causing harm? Can you reach out to someone that she trusts, like her from her church community, like a priest or a pastor or a faith leader? Is there someone who leads one of her societies, a longtime friend that she trusts implicitly, that can mention that, hey, it makes me feel really, it makes me feel unsafe when I drive you to one of our events, and you have this with you, or you really like working, volunteering at the library, but you can't bring your firearm in there. So you're going to have to make a choice between those two things. And so there's lots of different options there that you can present to her based on how well you know her, that are based around how do we make you feel safe? And then also how do we protect you from, how do we keep you from causing harm to the community, which I know would really very much bother you and the person that you are, right? Anyone have any thoughts, questions, concerns? No? Okay. Would we like to do one more or open it up for the Q&A?
Let's go for Q&A.
All right, sweet. So we'll slide ahead. The other ones dealt with a couple and someone with a TBI, so we can jump ahead. So as we open it up, I would just like to remind you all, please practice conversations, talk through them. The biggest thing to remember is that you know the person you're talking to. You know if they're the sort of person who's going to respond better to a joke, or you taking it seriously. You know that if, and because growing up in my family, if I got my grandmother to agree with me, then it was done. Everything would follow from there. So I knew that she was kind of going to be the credible messenger in my group. So practice so you're not nervous. Go to places like bradyunited.org to learn the stats and the facts that you need. Use the PSAs, share them with your networks, talk about firearm safety, by doing things even like Dean pointed out, having your doctor ask about firearm safety, asking when your kid goes for a play date if there are firearms in the home, and if so, are they stored securely? We really need to normalize this conversation in the same way we started normalizing conversations about things like allergies, right? Talk to your medical providers about safe storage. And then we have this is our lane guide with medical professionals that'll kind of that has more of these scripts with, where you can go, where not to go. And the biggie, if it doesn't go well, that doesn't mean you can never talk about it again. It just means that you now have learned something. You have an opportunity for your next conversation. All right, and with that, we'll open it up.